My name is Olive, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew everything about keeping family secrets. But standing at my daughter Sarah's wedding reception at this gorgeous California resort, watching her new husband Daniel charm the guests with talk about his next big real estate investment, I realized I was about to learn the most expensive lesson about when silence becomes cruelty. You see, I was hiding something that could change their lives forever. $50 million worth of beachfront properties that my late husband Robert left me 3 years ago. Properties that Daniel was unknowingly about to make the biggest mistake of his life trying to buy. Before I tell you how my silence turned their happiest day into their most expensive lesson, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Let me take you back to how this all began. 3 years ago, my husband Robert lost his battle with cancer. We had been married for 32 years, and I thought I knew everything about our finances. Robert had always been the one handling our investments, while I focused on my career as an elementary school teacher. I lived modestly, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and shopped at discount stores. Money was never something we flaunted. After the funeral, Robert's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, sat me down in his mahogany-paneled office and dropped a bombshell that left me speechless. Robert hadn't just left me our modest 2-bedroom house in Sacramento. He had quietly built a real estate empire that I never knew existed. 3 stunning beachfront properties worth $50 million combined. A sprawling villa in Malibu overlooking the Pacific, a rustic retreat in Big Sur, nestled among the redwoods, and an elegant estate in Carmel by the Sea with gardens that stretched to the ocean's edge. I stared at the deeds, the property photos, the bank statements showing rental income that had been automatically deposited into accounts I never knew existed. Robert had been protecting me from the complexity of wealth, but now I was drowning in it. The properties generated enough income that I could quit teaching and live like a queen, but something inside me rebelled against that idea. My daughter Sarah was 29, then working as a marketing executive in San Francisco. She had always been ambitious, but I noticed how differently she treated people once she started making good money. She would roll her eyes at my thrift store finds and suggest I upgrade my lifestyle. When she started dating Daniel, a smooth-talking real estate agent with expensive suits and even more expensive dreams, I watched her transform even more. Daniel was 32, handsome, in that polished way that comes from never having struggled for anything. He drove a leased BMW, wore a Rolex he couldn't afford, and talked constantly about his next big deal. He made decent money, but he spent like he made millions. Sarah was enchanted by his confidence and his promises of the wealthy lifestyle they would build together. I made a decision that day in the lawyer's office that would change everything. I would keep Robert's legacy secret, not forever, but until Sarah learned to value things beyond money, until she understood that real security came from character, not from bank accounts. I wanted her to build her own life, make her own mistakes, and find her own way before inherited wealth could spoil her judgment. The properties continued generating income, which I quietly donated to children's charities. I kept teaching, kept driving my old Honda, kept living the same modest life. Sarah never suspected that her frugal mother was technically worth more than most Hollywood celebrities. When Sarah and Daniel announced their engagement last spring, they chose the most expensive venue they could barely afford. A luxury resort in Napa Valley with a price tag that made me wince. Sarah wanted to impress her friends, to show off the life she thought she deserved. Daniel supported every extravagant choice, talking about how their wedding was an investment in their social network. I offered to help with costs, but they proudly declared they would pay for everything themselves, clearly wanting to prove their success. As the wedding day approached, I watched them stress about money while making increasingly poor financial decisions. Daniel had started talking about real estate investments, claiming he had insider knowledge that would make them rich quick. Sarah hung on his every word, believing she had found a man who would give her the wealthy lifestyle she craved. Neither of them asked for my advice about money, assuming their elderly teacher mother couldn't possibly understand their sophisticated plans. Standing at that wedding reception, surrounded by white roses and champagne glasses, I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me. In just a few hours, I would overhear a conversation that would test every principle I believed in about tough love and life lessons. I had no idea that my silence was about to become the most expensive wedding gift they never wanted. The trouble started during the cocktail hour when I was standing near the bar, admiring how beautiful Sarah looked in her grandmother's pearl earrings. Daniel was holding court with a group of his real estate buddies, his voice carrying across the patio as he gestured enthusiastically with his whiskey glass. "I'm telling you guys, this is the deal of a lifetime," Daniel was saying, his face flushed with excitement and alcohol. "Big Sur beachfront property, 18 acres of pristine coastline. The seller is some old widow who doesn't know what she's sitting on. My contact says we can get it for $2.5 million, but it's worth at least $8 million once we develop it into a boutique resort." My blood ran cold. Big Sur, 18 acres of beachfront. That was my property, the rustic retreat that Robert had bought 15 years ago as our private sanctuary, the place where we had spent countless weekends watching whales migrate past our secluded beach, the property that was legally mine and absolutely not for sale. I moved closer, pretending to examine the floral arrangements while straining to hear every word. Daniel's friend Marcus, another real estate agent with slicked back hair and a suspicious tan, was nodding approvingly. "You've done your due diligence, right, Danny?" Marcus asked. "Because beachfront property in Big Sur doesn't just sit on the market at below-market prices. There's usually a catch." Daniel waved dismissively. "My guy has been working this deal for months. The widow is in poor health, needs quick cash for medical bills. She's desperate to sell fast and quiet, no public listings, no bidding wars. We close next month, cash only. I've already secured the financing." I felt sick. Someone was running a con and Daniel was walking straight into it. But what made it worse was hearing him talk about some old widow who doesn't know what she's sitting on, like I was a fool to be taken advantage of. The property he was describing was mine, had been properly maintained and legally protected, and was definitely not for sale at any price. Sarah appeared at Daniel's side, sliding her arm through his with a proud smile. "Are you telling them about our big investment, honey?" she asked, practically glowing with excitement. "Our investment that's going to set us up for life, baby," Daniel replied, kissing her forehead. "We're going to be millionaires before our first anniversary." I watched my daughter's face light up with greed and pride, and my heart broke a little. This wasn't the girl I had raised to value education and hard work. This was a woman who had been seduced by easy money and get-rich-quick schemes. But what hurt even more was what came next. Sarah spotted me approaching and called out, "Mom, come hear about Daniel's amazing business deal. Though I guess all this investment talk is probably over your head." The condescension in her voice stung. My own daughter assuming that her teacher mother couldn't possibly understand real estate or business. Daniel barely glanced at me before launching into a simplified version of his deal, clearly speaking down to what he assumed was my limited understanding. "It's quite technical, Mrs. Henderson," he said with a patronizing smile. "Basically, I'm buying some undeveloped land that I can turn into a profitable business. You know, the kind of sophisticated investment that requires real business expertise." I bit my tongue and nodded politely, asking a few innocent questions about the location and timeline. Each answer confirmed my worst fears. Daniel wasn't just falling for a scam. He was doing it with money he didn't have. He mentioned securing a loan against his and Sarah's house, borrowing from friends, even cashing out his retirement account. "Mom, you look worried," Sarah said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be. Daniel knows what he's doing. He's been studying this market for years. Not everyone can understand these high-level business concepts." The dismissal was clear. In their minds, I was just a simple school teacher who couldn't possibly grasp their sophisticated financial strategies. They had no idea they were talking to the actual owner of the property they planned to steal from some imaginary desperate widow. As the evening progressed, I listened to Daniel field congratulations from other guests about his brilliant investment opportunity. He had clearly shared his plans widely, painting himself as a savvy businessman who had found the deal of the century. The irony was suffocating. The man was planning to use his wedding celebration to boast about scamming an elderly widow out of property worth $50 million, and that widow was sitting 20 feet away, eating overpriced wedding cake and keeping her mouth shut. By the time we reached the toasts, I had made my decision. I would let this play out. My daughter needed to learn that money earned through deception and arrogance always comes at a cost. She needed to discover what happened when you trusted someone who valued quick profits over honest work. And Daniel needed to learn that underestimating people, especially older women, was a mistake that could cost him everything. The next morning, I was still in my hotel room packing my overnight bag and trying to process everything I had overheard when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Peterson Hayes and Associates Roberts' old law firm that still managed my property portfolio. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Martin Hayes," came the familiar voice of Robert's former business partner. "I apologize for calling so early, but we have an urgent situation involving your Big Sur property." My stomach dropped. "What kind of situation, Martin?" "Someone is attempting to sell your property illegally. We've been contacted by multiple potential buyers who believe they're dealing with the legitimate owner. The scammer is using the name Marcus Delacroix, claims to be representing a distressed seller named Helen Martinez. He's created very convincing forged documents and is asking for cash transactions to avoid estate complications." I sat heavily on the hotel bed. Marcus. Daniel's contact with the suspicious tan and slicked-back hair, the same Marcus who had been at the wedding reception encouraging Daniel's investment plans. "Martin, how many people has this Marcus person contacted?" "We've identified at least 6 potential victims so far. The asking price varies, but he's generally targeting buyers looking for below-market deals. People who think they're getting away with something are less likely to ask difficult questions about authenticity." The ugly truth hit me like a physical blow. Daniel wasn't just falling for a scam, he was deliberately trying to cheat what he thought was a vulnerable elderly woman. He had convinced himself and my daughter that taking advantage of someone's supposed desperation was smart business. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to know if you want us to contact law enforcement immediately or if you'd prefer to handle this privately. We can have this Marcus person arrested for fraud, forgery, and attempted grand theft." I closed my eyes, thinking about Sarah's glowing face when she talked about their sophisticated investment, thinking about Daniel's condescending explanation of business concepts to the woman who actually owned the property he was trying to steal. "Martin, can you give me 48 hours before involving the police? I have a family situation to resolve first." "Of course. But Mrs. Henderson, if any money actually changes hands, this becomes a much more serious crime. These buyers could lose everything." After hanging up, I called Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice still bright with post-wedding euphoria. "Mom, wasn't yesterday perfect? Daniel and I are already looking at furniture for the new house we're going to buy once our investment pays off." "Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about Daniel's business deal. I'm concerned about some of the details he mentioned." The temperature in her voice dropped immediately. "Mom, I know you mean well, but this is exactly what Daniel said would happen. People who don't understand business always try to discourage success because they're jealous or scared of risk. I'm not jealous, sweetheart. I'm worried that someone might be taking advantage of him. Taking advantage? Sarah's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. Mom, Daniel has been working in real estate for 8 years. He has contacts and knowledge that you just don't have. I know you're not used to thinking about big money, but some of us are ready to move beyond penny pinching and teacher salaries. The words stung because they revealed how little my daughter understood about my actual situation. She had no idea that her penny-pinching mother could buy Daniel's investment property 12 times over without missing a payment on her electric bill. Just promise me you'll be careful with your finances. Don't put everything at risk for one deal. Mom, we're not children. We know what we're doing. Daniel's contact has all the legal paperwork ready. We're closing next month, and by Christmas, we'll be breaking ground on a resort that will set us up for life. I really wish you could be happy for us, instead of always expecting the worst. After she hung up, I sat in my hotel room staring at my phone and wondering if I was making the right choice. I could call her back, tell her the truth about my properties, show her the legal documents that proved her husband was about to commit fraud. I could save them from financial ruin with a single conversation. But I thought about the way Daniel had talked about taking advantage of a desperate elderly woman. I thought about Sarah's assumption that her teacher mother was too simple to understand business. I thought about the years of watching my daughter become more materialistic, more dismissive, more convinced that money was the only measure of success. Sometimes the most powerful lessons are the ones we learn from our own mistakes. Sometimes love means allowing people to fail so they can discover what really matters. I put my phone away and drove home to Sacramento, carrying the weight of a secret that was about to destroy my daughter's marriage and teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. 2 weeks later, I was grading spelling tests at my kitchen table when my phone rang with Sarah's number. I had been expecting this call, but nothing could have prepared me for the panic in my daughter's voice. Mom, something terrible has happened. Daniel's investment deal, it was all fake. The man who was selling the property doesn't even own it. We've lost everything. I set down my red pen and listened to my daughter sob through the details. Daniel had met Marcus at a coffee shop in San Francisco that morning for what was supposed to be the final paperwork signing. Instead, he had been confronted by the real estate agent, representing the actual property owner, along with a police officer who informed him that he was about to commit fraud. Daniel gave that man $2.5 million, Mom. Our entire savings, the equity from our house money he borrowed from his friends. It's all gone. The man we were buying from doesn't exist. The property belongs to some wealthy family who never put it up for sale. Through her tears, Sarah explained how the scam had worked. Marcus had identified Daniel as a greedy mark who would be attracted to an under-market deal. He had created fake documents, posed as a legitimate agent, and strung Daniel along for months while collecting good faith payments and processing fees. By the time Daniel realized he was being conned, Marcus had disappeared with their money and left behind nothing but forged papers and a fake business address. The police say we might never get the money back. Marcus used multiple fake identities and offshore accounts. Daniel is completely devastated. He keeps saying he was so sure he had done all the research. How could he have been so wrong? I listened to my daughter's anguish and felt the weight of my own choices. I could have prevented this with a single phone call 2 weeks ago. I could have saved them from financial ruin by simply telling them the truth about who owned that property. Sarah, honey, where are you now? Do you need somewhere to stay? We're at our house, but not for long. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings since Daniel used our house as collateral for the investment loan. We have maybe 30 days before we lose everything. Mom, I'm scared. We went from planning our dream life to losing our home in 2 weeks. How did this happen so fast? That afternoon, Sarah and Daniel appeared at my door. Daniel looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was disheveled, and his hands shook as he accepted the cup of coffee I offered him. The confident man who had lectured me about sophisticated business concepts was gone, replaced by someone who could barely make eye contact. "Mrs. Henderson, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "At the wedding, I was dismissive and condescending when you asked questions about my investment. You were trying to warn me, and I was too arrogant to listen. Sarah says you tried to tell her to be careful, and we both ignored you. I thought I was so smart, so much more business savvy than everyone else. I was an idiot." Sarah curled up on my couch like she was 12 years old again, seeking comfort from the mother she had dismissed just weeks before. "Mom, we don't know what to do. Daniel's friends are demanding their money back, but we don't have it. Our credit is ruined. Some of them are talking about lawsuits. We can't even afford an apartment deposit now." I sat in my recliner, looking at these two young people who had learned the hardest possible lesson about greed and arrogance. Part of me wanted to rescue them immediately, to write a check that would solve all their problems. But I knew that wouldn't teach them anything about the values they needed to rebuild their lives. "I can offer you the guest room here while you figure out your next steps," I said carefully. "But I need you both to understand something first. This happened because you made choices based on greed rather than wisdom. You thought you could take advantage of someone else's misfortune to get rich quick. You dismissed advice from people who cared about you because you thought you were smarter than everyone else." Daniel nodded miserably. "I know. I convinced myself that finding a desperate seller was just good business. But really I was planning to cheat someone. An elderly woman who supposedly needed money for medical bills. What kind of person does that make me?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would change everything between us. "Daniel, I need to tell you something about that property you tried to buy, about the elderly woman you thought you were taking advantage of." The silence in my living room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Sarah and Daniel sat frozen on my couch, staring at me with identical expressions of confusion and growing dread. "What do you mean, Mom?" Sarah asked slowly. "What about the elderly woman?" I walked to my bedroom and returned with the manila folder that Martin Hayes had given me 3 years ago. The folder containing deeds, property photos, and legal documents that I had hidden away like guilty secrets. I spread the papers across my coffee table and watched my daughter's eyes widen as she recognized the property descriptions. The elderly woman Daniel thought he was cheating out of 18 acres of Big Sur beachfront property was me. "I am the owner of the land you tried to buy. I have been the owner for 3 years, ever since your father died, and left me properties worth $50 million that I never told you about." Daniel's face went completely white. Sarah grabbed the deed from the table with shaking hands, reading her father's name, then mine stamped and notarized and absolutely legitimate. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. "Dad was a high school math teacher. We lived paycheck to paycheck. How could he have owned property worth $50 million? I sat back down and told them the story I should have shared years ago, about Robert's quiet investment strategy, buying undervalued coastal properties in the 1980s and 90s, when environmental regulations and development restrictions were still being written. About how he had reinvested rental income into more properties, building wealth slowly and secretly while we lived on our teaching salaries. About how he had protected me from the complexity of managing significant wealth until his death forced me to learn. "But why didn't you tell me?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. Why did you let us struggle and stress about money when you could have helped us? Why did you let Daniel make this horrible mistake?" Daniel had been silent during my explanation, but now he looked up with haunted eyes. "She didn't tell us because we never asked for help. We asked for nothing. We assumed she had nothing to give. We thought we were so much smarter and more successful than her simple teacher lifestyle. We were planning to steal from her." The weight of that realization settled over both of them. Daniel had spent months planning to defraud the very woman who had welcomed him into her family. He had described me as a desperate mark to his friends. He had celebrated the idea of taking advantage of my supposed ignorance and vulnerability. "I listened to you at the wedding, Daniel," I said quietly. "I heard you tell your friends about the ignorant old widow who didn't know what her property was worth. I watched you plan to steal from someone you thought was too weak and stupid to protect herself. I decided that you needed to learn what happens when you build success on other people's misfortune." Sarah buried her face in her hands. "Oh God, Mom, the things I said to you, the way I talked about your simple lifestyle and your inability to understand business. I was so cruel, so condescending, and the whole time you were wealthier than anyone I knew." "The money isn't the point, Sarah. The point is character. Your father built his wealth slowly, honestly, never hurting anyone or taking advantage of anyone's desperation. He taught me that real security comes from integrity, not from bank accounts. I wanted you to learn that lesson before you inherited anything that might corrupt your judgment." Daniel stood up suddenly and walked to my window, staring out at the modest suburban street where I had chosen to live, despite having enough money to buy any mansion in California. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Did you know from the beginning that Marcus was a con artist? Did you know I was going to lose my money?" I had dreaded this question, but I owed him the truth. "I suspected something was wrong when I heard the details of your deal. Legitimate Big Sur beachfront property doesn't sell for below-market prices to cash buyers with no public listing. When my lawyer called and confirmed that someone was using forged documents to sell my property, I knew you were walking into a scam. And you didn't stop me. I didn't stop you." Daniel turned back to face me, and I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for the justified fury of someone who had lost everything because of my choice to remain silent. Instead, his voice was quiet and thoughtful. "You let me destroy my life to teach me that destroying other people's lives is wrong. I let you learn that actions have consequences, that greed leads to suffering, that treating people with respect and kindness matters more than making money." Sarah was crying again, but these were different tears. Not the panicked sobs of someone facing financial ruin, but the deeper grief of someone confronting their own moral failures. "Mom, I am so sorry for the way I treated you, for the assumptions I made, for choosing money over family. Daniel and we became people I don't even recognize. People who thought success meant taking advantage of others. People who looked down on the woman who raised me to be better than that." I moved to the couch and pulled my daughter into my arms, holding her the way I had when she was small, and the world seemed too big and scary to navigate alone. She felt fragile against me, stripped of the confident materialism that had defined her for the past few years. "The question now," I said to both of them, "is what you're going to do next. You've lost your money and your house, but you haven't lost your ability to rebuild. You can choose to become bitter and blame others for your mistakes, or you can choose to become better people because of this experience." 6 months have passed since that conversation in my living room, and I'm amazed by how much can change when people decide to rebuild their lives on solid foundations instead of get-rich-quick schemes. Sarah and Daniel spent 3 months in my guest room, not as freeloaders waiting for a handout, but as people determined to earn their way back to stability. Daniel took a job with a property management company, working for an hourly wage that was a fraction of his previous commissions. Instead of chasing big deals and fast money, he focused on learning the honest side of real estate, helping elderly clients downsize their homes and families find affordable housing. He discovered that he actually enjoyed the work when it was about helping people instead of exploiting them. Sarah took a temporary position with a nonprofit organization that provided financial literacy classes to low-income families. Teaching people how to avoid scams and build savings gave her perspective on how privileged her previous complaints about money had been. She began to understand the difference between wanting nice things and needing to feel superior to others through material possessions. The hardest part was watching them face the consequences of their choices. Daniel's former friends, the ones who had lost money in his failed investment, were not interested in apologies or payment plans. Some of them filed lawsuits that will follow him for years. His reputation in the high-end real estate market was destroyed, and he had to accept that he might never work in luxury sales again. Sarah struggled with the social embarrassment of moving back in with her mother and taking a job that paid less than her previous spending budget for shoes. Friends who had envied her wedding and her husband's big plans now whispered about their financial collapse. She had to learn the difference between true friends and people who were only interested in her lifestyle. But slowly, something beautiful began to emerge from the wreckage. Without the pressure to maintain an expensive image, Sarah and Daniel began to rediscover what they actually enjoyed about each other. They started taking walks in my neighborhood, cooking simple meals together, playing board games in the evenings. Their relationship, which had been built on shared dreams of wealth, transformed into something deeper and more genuine. 3 months ago, they moved into a modest apartment across town, not because I kicked them out, but because they had saved enough money to cover first and last month's rent through careful budgeting and honest work. Daniel brought me flowers on moving day, not the expensive bouquet he might have chosen in his old life, but a simple bunch of daisies from the grocery store that somehow meant more than any luxury gift. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "I know I can never fully make up for what I did, but I want you to know that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was becoming someone I couldn't respect, and you helped me find my way back to being someone I can live with." Sarah hugged me tightly before they left, whispering, "Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail. Thank you for caring more about my character than my comfort." Last week, Sarah called to tell me that she had been offered a full-time position with the nonprofit, with benefits and a small salary increase. Daniel had been promoted to assistant manager at his property management company. They were talking about starting a family not because they could afford luxury childcare and private schools, but because they finally felt emotionally mature enough to raise children with good values. I still live in my modest house in Sacramento, still drive my old Honda Civic, still shop for bargains at the grocery store. The $50 million in beachfront properties continues to generate income that I donate to educational charities and organizations that help families recover from financial fraud. I have not given Sarah and Daniel any money beyond letting them stay in my guest room, and I don't plan to until I'm confident they understand the difference between wealth and worth. Some people might think I was cruel to let my daughter and son-in-law lose everything when I could have prevented it. Some might argue that a loving mother would have rescued them from their own poor choices. But I believe that real love sometimes means allowing people to experience the consequences of their actions so they can grow into better versions of themselves. The properties that Robert left me are still there, still beautiful, still worth a fortune. But the most valuable inheritance he gave me wasn't money or real estate. It was the understanding that character matters more than capital, that respect is earned through actions, not bank accounts, and that the people we become matters more than the things we accumulate. My daughter learned that prosperity built on deception is never worth the cost. My son-in-law discovered that true success comes from helping others, not from taking advantage of them. And I learned that sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that teach us what truly matters. I still own those $50 million worth of beachfront properties, but now I know my daughter owns something far more valuable: wisdom, earned through hardship, and humility learned through loss. And that inheritance, unlike money, can never be stolen, lost, or spent unwisely. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have warned your child about the scam, or would you have let them learn from their mistakes? Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love from consequences or allowing them to grow through difficulty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this story a like if it made you think about the real value of family lessons. Subscribe for more true stories that explore the complicated choices we make for the people we care about most, and share this with someone who might need to hear about the difference between wealth and wisdom. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is trust the people we care about to become stronger through their struggles.